There was one door in our farmhouse that only opened on Sundays and never for me. It sat at the end of the upstairs hall, plain pine like the others, except its brass keyhole was worn pale from handling. On cold afternoons, the wood felt warm to the touch because the chimney ran up behind it. Every Sunday after the last hymn, my husband went in alone. He stayed exactly as long as one record played on his mother's old cabinet below. Then he came out calm, quiet, and somehow further away. The key never hung on his belt. It hung on his mother's apron, and I did not yet know why. My name is Miriam, and I married into a family everyone in the district admired. Before I tell you what was in that room, let me say plainly that I share these things now so other women might recognize a quiet feeling they were taught to ignore. This channel is where I gather stories like mine, ordinary homes with a locked corner nobody explains. If that matters to you, follow along and stay through to the end, because the door does open. As you listen, I want you to hold one small question with me, not what was behind the door, but why a grown man needed his mother's permission to enter his own house. I came from a settlement 2 valleys east, stricter than his, poorer in every way that could be counted. We had 1 plow horse between 3 families and mended our shoes until the soles were more thread than leather. So when the match was made, everyone told me I was fortunate. His people had land, a dairy, a name that opened doors at the mill without a word spoken. My mother pressed my hand and said gratitude was a kind of prayer. I believed her. I packed my few dresses, my grandmother's Bible, and 1 quilt, and I rode west toward a house I had only seen once, certain that a full pantry meant a full life. The house was larger than any I had lived in, 3 stories of squared timber, with a summer kitchen and a spring house, and a barn you could lose a child in. His mother met me at the door before he did. She was not unkind that first day. She took my face in both hands, studied me the way you study a mare before a long season, and said the family kept good order, and I would learn it. I thought she meant the sweeping and the canning. I nodded and thanked her. Behind her, in the hall, my husband stood waiting to be told he could greet his own wife. That should have been my first warning, but a new bride excuses everything. I told myself he was a gentle man, and he was. He never raised his voice. He carried water so I would not strain, and he noticed when I was tired before I did. In front of others he was easy and warm, quick with a joke at the mill, generous at the collection. But at home, when his mother spoke, something in him folded quietly inward, like a man remembering a debt. I mistook it for respect. In our world, honoring your parents is not a suggestion. It is the frame the whole house is built on. The order she meant became clear slowly, in the way cold comes into a room. I did not handle money, not the egg money, not the milk check, not the coins for thread. When I needed anything, I asked, and my husband asked her, and she decided. It was explained as devotion, that the eldest woman kept the household so the younger women could keep their hearts free of worldly worry. It sounded almost tender. I remember thinking my own mother would have wept for such ease. I did not yet understand that a woman who cannot count her own money cannot know what she is worth to the people around her. There was a sister-in-law in the house too, Anelise, married to my husband's brother. She had been in the family 10 years and had 4 children and hands that never stopped moving. She was warm to me, but guarded, the way a person is guarded around a stove they have been burned on before. One evening I mentioned the Sunday door lightly, only to make talk while we shelled peas. Her fingers stopped, just for a breath. Then she looked at the window and said the men liked their quiet on the Sabbath, and we should let them have it. She never met my eyes while she said it, and the peas were very green in the bowl between us. I began to watch that door the way you watch a wound you have been told not to touch. It was never locked on weekdays. Anyone could walk in and find only shelves and a plain desk and a cabinet of old record books, dull as any farm office. But Saturday nights, his mother turned the key, and Sunday evenings, after service and the long silent supper, my husband went in with that key borrowed from her apron and came out changed. Once I asked him what he did in there. He said he settled the week with the Lord. It was the kind of answer that closes a door twice. I want you to understand I was not a suspicious woman. I had been raised to trust that the people set above me knew things I did not, and that peace was worth more than answers. For most of that first year I folded my questions small and put them away, the same way I put away my summer dresses in the fall. But questions do not keep like cloth. They mildew in the dark. And there was one I could not fold small enough, the one that came back every Sunday when I heard that record start and stop below me. What was worth locking away from a wife, but not from the Sabbath? The door opened for me only once, and by the time it did, 3 women in that house had already lived their whole married lives on the wrong side of it. I did not know that yet. I did not know the key I feared was only one of 2. I did not know that somewhere behind that warm pine door, in a book I had never seen, my own name was already written in a hand that was not mine, beside a number I had never agreed to. That first year I only knew the door was locked, and that the woman who held the key was watching me, the way you watch something you have not yet decided how to use. The dairy was the center of everything, and the ledger of the dairy was the center of the family. I learned this without being taught. Every evening after milking, my husband and his brother reported the day's yield at the kitchen table, and his mother wrote it into a small green book she kept in her apron pocket, never in the office. I noticed that early. The everyday numbers lived on her body. The other numbers, the ones I could not name yet, lived behind the door. 2 sets of accounts, one that walked around the house, and one that never left the room. It took me a long while to wonder why a family so honest needed 2. Because they were honest. That is the part outsiders never quite believe. My husband's father had died before I came, but his name was still spoken like a psalm. The family paid every debt on time and forgave a neighbor's late payment more than once. When a barn burned 3 farms over, they were first with wagons and lumber. In the district, to be a woman of that house was to be trusted before you opened your mouth. I felt the warmth of it at the quilting frolics, the way the older women made room for me at the frame. I mistook their respect for the family as respect for me. It was only a loan. My husband himself was not a hard man to love, which made everything harder later. He remembered that I liked the heel of the bread. He kept a jar of horehound drops in the buggy because I got a dry throat in winter. When our first child came, a boy we named after his grandfather, my husband wept openly and held him for an hour before he would let his mother take him. I have thought about that hour many times since. It was the last time I saw him hold something the family wanted and refuse, even for a little while, to hand it over. His mother did not dislike me. I want to be fair, because fairness is the only thing I have left to give her. She fed me well. She taught me her mother's way with a sourdough start, and her way of banking a fire so it held till dawn. But her kindness had a ceiling, and the ceiling was the family's order. If I stayed under it, I was a daughter. The one time in that first year I reached above it, I asked whether I might keep a little of the egg money for my own mother, who was ailing. The kindness did not vanish. It simply cooled, the way milk cools, and I learned not to ask. To you it may sound simple. Just take the money. Just open the door. But I want you to picture the whole weight of it. I had no bank account and no name at any bank. The horse and buggy were his. The house was the family's. My children ate from the family's table and would inherit the family's standing or none at all. My own settlement was too poor to take a returning wife with a baby and would have counted my return as a shame on my mother. Every road out of that kitchen ran back through a woman with a key. That is what dependence is. It is not a wall. It is the absence of any door but theirs. Anelise and I grew closer over that year, in the careful way of women who share a stove and a secret they have not yet spoken. She never warned me directly, but she taught me things sideways. She showed me how to fold laundry so the good sheets stayed on top for company and the worn ones stayed hidden. She showed me which of the mother's silences meant let it go and which meant come back tomorrow. Once, hanging wash in a hard wind, she said out of nowhere that she used to have a little money of her own before she married in. Then she pinned a shirt and said nothing more, and the wind took the rest. I have thought about that sentence for years. Before she married in, as if marrying into that house were a border you crossed, and the crossing cost you something you handed over at the door and were told you would get back, and never did. I did not understand it then. I was still counting my blessings the way my mother taught me, still telling myself that a full pantry was a full life. But a small cold seed had been planted, and it was the same seed that grows in every woman who begins to notice that her gratitude is being managed by someone who benefits from it. That winter, our second, I made a small decision that I thought was nothing. It was the kind of thing you would not think twice about in your own home. Our boy had outgrown his winter things, and there was fabric to be had cheap at the mill store, good wool, gray and warm. I did not ask. I did not think I needed to. I took 4 eggs I had gathered with my own hands, traded them at the store, and carried home enough wool to keep my son warm through the cold. I was proud of it. I did not yet know that trade would be entered in a book I had never seen, or that entering it would be treated as the first crack in the frame of the whole house. I sewed the coat over 3 evenings, after the boy was down and the kitchen was mine. I remember how good the work felt in my hands. It was the first thing in that house I had begun and finished on my own decision, from the trade to the last button. When my son wore it to Sunday service, warm and gray and neat, 2 women admired it. I told them I had made it and left out the eggs, not because I was hiding anything, but because it did not seem worth telling. My husband heard me say it. He smiled at the coat. Then his smile went somewhere private, and I saw him do the thing he did with his mother, fold quietly inward, remembering a debt. That evening, after the record played and the door closed and opened again, he found me at the wash basin. He was not angry, he never was. He asked, very gently, where the wool had come from. I told him, 4 eggs, the mill store, a fair trade. He nodded a long time. Then he said, in the voice he used for reading scripture, that his mother liked to know where things came from and where things went, and that from now on I should bring the eggs to her and let her decide what they became. It was so reasonable. It was so quiet. It took me until I was in bed to feel the insult of it, because it was an insult, though I could not have said so then. I had traded 4 eggs that I had gathered from hens I fed to warm a child I had borne, and I was being told kindly that this was not mine to do. The next morning I did something I had never done. I asked to see the book. I said it plainly, at the table, that if my small trades were being written down, I would like to know what was written. The kitchen went still. His mother did not look up from the green apron book. She said only that the accounts were kept in order, and that a woman who trusted her family did not need to read them. I want to be honest about how that sentence worked on me. Not the surface of it, but the machinery underneath. It did not forbid me. It turned my simple question into a test of my faith. To ask again would be to admit I did not trust the very people who had taken me in and fed my child. It reframed a locked book as an open heart, and my curiosity as its opposite. I had been raised to fear exactly that accusation, so I lowered my eyes and said I was sorry, and I meant it, and I hated that I meant it. That is how it holds. You apologize for wanting to see your own life written down. But the door had cracked, just a hair, and through the crack I saw one true thing. The green apron book was not where my egg trade would live. That book held only milk and market. My 4 eggs, my small coat, my one decision, those belonged to the other book, the one behind the warm pine door. Everyday numbers walked around the house, but anything a woman did on her own was carried upstairs and shut in. I understood then, in a wordless way, that the room was not a place for money. It was a place for us. Somewhere in that room, my name already had a page, and I had never seen a line of it. That week, the shape of my days quietly changed. Nothing was announced. My egg gathering was reassigned to Anelise's oldest girl. The small store of coins I had been trusted with for thread and pins was gone from the drawer where it lived, and when I asked, his mother said she would handle household goods herself now, to spare me, to spare me. Every taking was dressed as a kindness, and every kindness left me with a little less of my own hands to use. I began to feel the way you feel when a room grows colder by degrees. You keep telling yourself it is fine, and you keep pulling your shawl tighter, and you do not notice you are shivering until someone else walks in warm. I told myself I had brought it on myself. That is the cruelest thing that structure did. It made me its own overseer. I studied my own behavior for the fault. I decided I had been proud, that I had shamed the family by claiming the coat as mine before others, that a humble woman would have let the work speak and taken no credit. So I set out to be humbler. I stopped saying I when I could say we. I brought every small want to my husband first, and let it die there if it must. And for a little while the warmth returned, and I mistook the return of warmth for the return of my worth. But a question, once cracked open, does not seal again. It only waits. It waited in me all that spring, quiet under the mending and the milking, and the second child I was beginning to carry. Every Sunday I heard the record start below and stop again, and every Sunday I thought about the book that held my 4 eggs and my son's gray coat, and whatever else of me had been carried up those stairs without my knowing. And one afternoon, folding a quilt my grandmother had made, I felt something hard sewn into the binding, small, flat, and cold, the shape of a key. I did not open the binding that day. I sat with the quilt in my lap for a long time, feeling that hard, cold shape through the cotton, and I put it away in the chest, exactly as I had found it. I am not proud of that. But you have to understand what a key means in a house where you own nothing. A key is not a thing you find, it is a thing that finds you, and once it has, you cannot pretend it did not. I closed the chest lid and went down to supper, and passed the bread and answered when spoken to, and the whole time a small flat weight sat behind my ribs where the quilt had been. The withdrawal, meanwhile, had become its own weather in the house. His mother did not scold me. She simply spent me less. She stopped asking my opinion on the canning, stopped saving me the first taste of a new batch of apple butter, stopped the small daily inclusions that had made me feel like a daughter. My husband, sensing his mother's cooled to match it, the way a pond takes the temperature of the air above it. He was not punishing me. He was only obeying the room he had been raised in. But the effect on a young wife carrying a second child is the same whether the cold is aimed or merely inherited. You start to feel that you have done something you cannot name. Anelise felt it before I said a word. One morning she left a small dish of stewed pears at my place, the good ones, the ones the mother rationed. Another day she took over my heaviest wash without asking. She never spoke of why. But I understood that she had lived through this exact cooling once herself, and recognized its early frost on someone else. Her kindness had a quality I had not felt before, not warmth exactly, but recognition, the way one soldier looks at another. She was not comforting a sad new bride. She was standing beside a woman who had begun to see the same things she saw and was afraid of what came next. The warning, when it came, did not come from her. It came at a quilting frolic, from an old woman I barely knew, one of the district's oldest, near blind, with hands still quick at the frame. We were set beside each other, and she asked, without preamble, whose I was. I told her the family. Her needle did not pause. She said low enough that only I could hear, that some doors in that house stayed shut to keep the peace, and to keep the count. Then she asked me to thread her needle, as if she had said nothing at all. I threaded it. My fingers did not work right for the rest of the afternoon. To keep the count. I turned those words over all the way home in the buggy, my son asleep against me, my husband quiet at the reins. The count of what? I had assumed the room held money, ledgers, the ordinary hidden business of a prosperous farm, but an old woman 2 farms distant knew there was a count worth keeping shut, and knew it well enough to warn a stranger's bride over a quilt, which meant this was not only our house's secret. It was the district's open one, a thing the older women all knew and had agreed, long ago, not to say to the young ones until it was too late for saying to matter. That knowledge changed the fear. Before, I had feared I was failing my family. Now I began to fear something colder, that I was not failing at all, that I was performing exactly as designed, and that my failure was only in noticing. I lost my footing on small things. I no longer knew whether to ask his mother for a spool of thread, or to do without and be praised for thrift. I had lost the standing even to speak for my own children's little needs without it becoming a matter weighed and recorded. A woman who must earn permission to buy thread does not know, from one day to the next, what she is allowed to be. I kept the second key a secret from everyone, including Anelise, and that secret cost me. I found myself watching the mother's apron, marking when she wore it and when she hung it by the wash line and left it. I told myself I was only curious, but a woman does not memorize the movements of a key she means to leave alone. Somewhere in me a decision had already been made that my mind had not yet been told. I began to feel it as a second heartbeat, faint under the pregnancy, the slow, patient pulse of a plan I was not ready to admit I was making. Then, near the end of that summer, his mother called what she named a family sitting. It was not a scolding and not a service. It was something between, and I had never seen one called for me. She set it for the following Sunday, after the door had done its weekly work, and she told me only that there were things a young wife needed to understand plainly, so that we might all have peace. My husband would not meet my eyes when she said it. Anelise, drying a plate, set it down too carefully, and I understood that whatever the room had recorded about me, it was about to be read aloud. The sitting was held at the kitchen table, but the table had been changed. There was no food on it, no cloth, nothing of the daily life that usually covered it. In the center lay a single book, not the green apron book, a larger one, bound in dark cloth worn gray at the corners, the kind of binding that has been handled by many hands over many years. It was closed. It stayed closed the whole time, which I came to understand was the point. The book did not need to be read to me. It only needed to sit there between us, shut, so that I would know it existed and know I would not see inside it. 3 elder women of the family sat with the mother, wives of her late husband's brothers, women I had smiled at across 100 suppers. My husband sat at the far end, present but somehow not, a witness rather than a party. I understood quickly that this was not a matter for men. Whatever the room held, whatever the count was, it passed between women, mother to daughter-in-law, and the men only guarded the door. The mother opened by saying she had heard I was troubled. She said it gently, with concern, as though I were feverish. She said a spirit of restlessness had come into me, and that they had gathered to help me put it down. I had prepared, in my head, to defend myself. I had 4 eggs and a child's coat and a fair trade, and I meant to say so plainly. But you cannot defend against concern. Every complaint I might have made, she had already turned into a symptom. My wish to see the accounts became pride. My question about my own money became a want of submission. My unease became a sickness of the spirit that the family, in its love, would nurse me through. She did not once say I was wrong. She said I was unwell, and that they would be patient with me. And I sat there and felt the ground of my own mind tilt, because it is very hard to keep hold of what you know when kind people are grieving that you know it. One of the elder women took my hand across the table. She said she remembered feeling as I felt, long ago, when she first came into the family. She said it passed. She said the peace of the house was worth more than any small thing a young woman thought she wanted for herself, and that one day I would be grateful I had been kept from my own restlessness. It was meant as comfort. It landed as a sentence, because in it I heard the whole machine described from the inside, a woman who had once sat where I sat, been managed as I was being managed, and had come out the other side as one of the managers. This was not a punishment. It was an initiation, and I was refusing my part. What they wanted was simple, and that was the terror of it. They did not want money from me, or labor, or confession of a real fault. They wanted me to stop looking. They offered a trade so clean it barely felt like one. Give up the wish to see, and the warmth returns, the belonging returns, the daughterhood returns. Keep looking, and I would remain what I had become that summer, a cold spot in a warm house, a woman the family loved and did not trust. They called this help, and in a sense it was. It was help, the way a splint is help, holding a thing so still it cannot move at all. I said the words they wanted. I want you to know that, because I think some of you have said them too, in rooms of your own. I said I was sorry for my restlessness. I said I trusted the family. I asked their forgiveness for troubling the peace. I said it because a woman 5 months along with a second child, with no money and no road home, says what the room requires. But even as I said it, some hard, small part of me stood apart and watched myself say it, and did not believe a word. That part had a key sewn in a quilt upstairs. That part was already, quietly, keeping its own count. The warmth did return, exactly as promised, and that frightened me more than the cold ever had. Within a week I was daughter again, saved the first apple butter, asked my opinion on the canning. The speed of it told me how practiced they were, how many times this exact repair had been made. But I had learned one true thing at that table, and no returning warmth could unlearn it for me. The book was not only money. Those elder women had not gathered over a matter of eggs. The dark-bound book held the women of the house, what each of us had brought in, what each of us had given up, and what, by the count, each of us still owed. That night Anelise found me alone at the spring house, filling the crocks. She did not pretend the sitting had not happened. She looked at me a long moment in the last of the light, and then she said the thing she had been holding back since the day I arrived. She said she had sat at that same table once. She said she had signed her name to a paper the day she married in, believing it a blessing, and had never seen the paper again. And she said, so quietly I had to lean in over the cold water to hear her, that if I ever meant to read what I had signed, I had better learn now where the mother kept the second key, because there was only one thing in that house worth keeping too. We did not speak more that night. Anelise was not a reckless woman. She had 4 children whose place in the family hung on her silence, and she had already said more than she had said in 10 years. But a few days later, when the mother rode with my husband to the far county to see about a heifer, Anelise came to my room with an armful of ticking and said the mattresses wanted restuffing before the cold. It was ordinary work, the kind no one questions. We carried them to the yard, split the seams, and pulled out the old straw, and with our hands buried to the elbow and our faces bent over the work, she finally told me what she knew. She had married in at 17, from a family poorer than mine. On her wedding day, before the meal, the mother had taken her aside with the elder women and set a paper before her. It was written close in the old script, and Anelise could read only a little, and what she could read spoke of duty and submission and the honoring of the family's order. She signed it because everyone was smiling, because refusing would have shamed her people, because a bride does not stop her own wedding to read. She never saw it again. But she understood, over the years, that the paper had bound not just her conduct but her property, the small inheritance from her own mother, absorbed into the family accounts for safekeeping, and never returned. I asked her what safekeeping meant. She laughed, a short dry sound with no humor in it, and pulled a fistful of straw loose. It meant, she said, that the money existed on paper, in the dark-bound book, credited to the family, owed back to her only if she remained obedient, and only at the family's discretion. It was not stolen, exactly. Nothing in that house was ever stolen. It was held, and a thing held long enough by someone stronger than you becomes, for all purposes, theirs. She had stopped asking about it years ago, when she understood that asking marked her, and that her children would pay for the mark. I told her about my 4 eggs, my son's coat, the sitting, the closed book on the bare table. She nodded through all of it, as though she had watched it happen to herself in a mirror. When I finished, she stopped working. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pressed something into my straw-covered hand. It was a single sheet, folded small, soft at the creases from handling. I opened it. It was a page ruled in careful columns, but empty, a blank leaf torn from the same kind of ledger, blank because, she said, she had once tried to copy her own page and had lost her nerve at the door and taken only the empty sheet to prove to herself she had gone. That empty page told me more than a full one could have. It told me the book had a fixed form, columns and headings, a design meant to be filled in the same way for every woman across every generation. This was not one bitter mother-in-law hoarding coins. It was a system, older than she was, that she had inherited the way she inherited the sourdough start and the way of banking a fire, passed hand to hand, woman to woman, dressed each time in the language of order and love. The mother was its keeper, but someone before her had built it, and someone before that, and the room behind the warm door held them all. That changed the whole shape of my fear, and strangely, it eased one part of it. For a year, I had believed the coldness was aimed at me, that I had failed some private test. Now I saw I was only the newest entry in a book that had been filling for longer than anyone living could remember. It was not personal. That was the horror and the mercy of it at once. Nothing I could have done differently would have spared me. The room did not care who I was. It cared only that I was a woman who had married in, and that women who married in were to be counted, credited, and kept. But the discovery raised a question I could not put down, and it was not about the mother. It was about my husband. What did he know? He guarded the door every Sunday. He carried the key from her apron and settled the week, he said, with the Lord. Did he understand what he was settling? Was he a keeper who knew the count, or a son who performed a ritual whose meaning had been withheld even from him? Anelise did not know. Her own husband, she said, had never spoken of it, and she had never dared ask. Some men, she said, guard a door their whole lives and never once wonder what makes it worth a lock. We stuffed the mattresses with fresh straw and sewed the seams and carried them back up before the light failed, and to anyone watching we had done nothing but honest work. But I carried that blank page folded into my own apron now, against my body, and it felt heavier than the wet straw had. I had wanted, that first year, only to see my own name written down. Now I knew my name sat in a book beside women I would never meet, in a hand that would one day write another woman's name beneath mine. And I understood that whatever I decided to do, I was no longer deciding it only for myself. I was deciding it for the next bride who would sign a paper on her wedding day and smile. The winter came hard that year, the kind that keeps the buggies in and the doors shut and the whole family folded together in the warm rooms for weeks at a stretch. It was in that closeness that the mother took ill. It began as a cough she waved away, then a fever that would not break, then a slow settling into her bed that everyone understood, without saying, was the last settling. The house rearranged itself around her sick room, and I, who had learned to watch her apron, saw that when she took to bed, she gave the key to no one. It stayed with her, on a cord around her neck now, under her nightdress, close to her skin even in the fever. I nursed her. I want to be plain about that, because it matters. I was not kind to her out of forgiveness. I had none to give yet. I was kind because kindness put me at her bedside, and her bedside was where the key was, and because a dying woman says things a well one never would. I brought her broth and cool cloths, and sat the long night watches when the others slept. She let me. Near the end her hardness thinned the way ice thins over running water, and things came up through it. She spoke to people who were not there. She gave instructions to a herd that had been sold before I was born, and one night, in the low hours, she looked straight at me and called me by another woman's name. She called me Salome. She said, "Salome, you have the same trouble in your eyes your mother had, and it did neither of you any good." She said the count would come out even in the end, it always did, if I would only stop pulling at the seams. I sat very still and let her think I was Salome, because I understood I was being told something true by a mind that had lost its guard. Salome was not a name I knew. But she spoke it the way you speak of someone you have both blamed and grieved for a lifetime, and I realized she was speaking to a woman 2 generations back, a wife who had also had trouble in her eyes, and who the book remembered. So I was not the first to look. That was the reframe that turned the whole story over in my hands. I had imagined myself the lone restless bride in a line of contented ones, the single crack in a smooth wall. But there had been a Salome. There had been others, whose names I would find later, women who had pulled at the same seams and been managed by the same patient hands, or the hands before them. The book did not only record what each woman brought and owed, it recorded, in its way, each woman's resistance and how it had been put down. The mother was not merely keeping accounts, she was keeping a history of exactly this, of women who noticed, and what noticing had cost them. More came, over those nights, in pieces I had to fit together. She spoke of my own marriage as a settlement. She said her husband and my father's people had a matter between them, an old debt from a land sale gone wrong 2 decades past, and that my coming into the family had squared it. I had been the payment. Not a bride chosen for a son, but a term of an agreement between men, entered in the book as surely as my 4 eggs. My mother had pressed my hand and called gratitude a prayer, and I do not think she knew. I think she, too, had only been told I was fortunate, and had believed it because believing it was easier than the truth. The Sunday ritual came clear as well, and it was smaller and colder than any secret I had imagined. There was nothing holy behind that door. The room backed the chimney, not to sanctify it, but to keep it dry, so the paper would not mildew, so the ink would not run, so the count would survive the damp of 100 winters. Sunday was reckoning day, because Sunday was the day the family stood before God clean and paid, and the mother could not stand clean until the week's small debts and duties were entered and squared in the dark-bound book. My husband's calm distance when he came out was not devotion, it was the peace of a man who has balanced a column. But her illness sharpened one danger to a point. When she died, the key would pass, and the roll with it. Someone would become the next keeper of the count. Anelise's husband was the elder son, but the book passed through women, mother to daughter-in-law, and Anelise had shown, 10 years ago, that she could be managed. I had shown I could not, which left a question hanging over that sick room heavier than the fever smell. Would they trust the count to me and try to make me a keeper, the way the elder woman at the table had once been made one? Or would they decide I was a Salome and manage me the way Salome had been managed, whatever that had been? I got my answer on one of the last clear evenings when my husband sat with me by the stove after the watch changed. He was tired and grieving, and more open than I had ever known him. He said, when his mother was gone, things would be easier. He said he would take the room, and I need not trouble myself with any of it, that he would keep the count as it had always been kept, gently, and I would want for nothing. He meant it as tenderness. He meant it as the greatest gift he could offer, that I would never have to see the book because he would carry it for me. And I understood, in that moment, that he did not mean to end the count at all. He meant to inherit it. He meant to become the door. I did not argue with him that night. I had learned, at the bare table, that argument only fed the machine new proof of my restlessness. So I said it sounded like a comfort, and I let him believe I was comforted. And inside I felt something go very quiet and very clear, the way a pond goes clear when the wind at last dies. He was not a cruel man. That was the hardest part to hold. He loved me in the only shape he had been given, the shape of a man who guards and provides and keeps his wife from the weight of things. He simply could not see that the weight he was sparing me was the weight of my own life, and that carrying it was the only thing I had left to want. Leaving crossed my mind, the way it must cross yours as you listen, but I need you to sit inside the actual arithmetic of it, because it is not the arithmetic of a free woman. I had 2 children now, the second born that autumn, a girl. If I left with nothing that the law of that place would call mine, and I left the children to a house that would raise them in the count, and teach them, gently, that their mother had been restless and unwell. My own settlement would take me as a shame. There was no cousin with a spare room, no wage I could earn, no bank that knew my name. Every road out ran through the very book I was forbidden to read. So I did not plan to leave. I planned to see. That was the whole of my ambition through those last weeks of her decline. Not escape, not revenge, only to read what had been written about me in a hand that was not mine, before the key passed to a man who would keep me from it forever out of love. It seems a small ambition. It was not. In that house, a woman wanting to read her own account was the largest ambition there was, larger than leaving, because leaving only removed you from the book, while reading it broke the one rule the book was built to protect. I made myself useful in ways that kept me near. I learned the phrases the mother used in her fever, the account words, credited and held and squared and against, and I understood them better each night. I learned which drawer in the office held the everyday green book and confirmed, by looking, that my egg coat and my 4 eggs were not in it, that the everyday book was clean and honest and meant to be seen, a decoy of ordinary numbers standing in front of the room where the real count lived. And I confirmed, watching her sleep, that the key on its cord never left her neck, which meant there was a night coming, the last night, when it would have to leave. My husband grew watchful as she failed. He was grieving his mother, but he was also, I think, feeling the weight of the door coming toward him, and it made him anxious in a way I had never seen. He checked the office more often. He asked, twice, whether I had been in the upstairs hall. He began to sleep lightly, waking at the stairs' least creak. He did not suspect me of a plan. I do not think he believed me capable of one. He was only feeling, without words, that the order he had inherited was loosening at exactly the moment it was meant to pass cleanly to him, and he did not know why, and it frightened him. There was one evening of false hope, and I will tell it because hope is part of the count too. The mother rallied. For 2 days her fever broke and her mind cleared, and she sat up and took solid food and spoke sensibly, and the whole house exhaled. My husband wept with relief and said perhaps she would see the spring, and I felt, to my shame, not relief but a sinking, because a well mother meant the key back on the apron, and the door locked tight, and the count going on exactly as it had for 100 years. I have never told anyone that I sat at the bedside of a recovering woman and grieved her recovery. It is the truest measure of what that house had made of me. The rally did not hold. On the 3rd day the fever climbed again and took her further than before, and this time everyone understood there would be no more clear evenings. The house went from hoping to waiting. Anelise and I kept the watches between us now, sparing the men, and in those long shared hours by the failing woman, Anelise and I said, without quite saying it, what we both knew was coming. She did not offer to help me. She could not. Her children's place forbade it. But once, near dawn, she looked at the cord on the mother's neck and then at me, and she said only that a key left a body the moment the body was done with it, and that whoever was in the room at that moment held it before anyone thought to ask who should. Something woke in me then that had been sleeping the whole 2 years, under the gratitude and the humbling and the returning warmth. Not anger, though there was anger in it. It was more like waking to your own name after a long time of being called by another. I had come into that house believing a full pantry was a full life. I had let my hands be emptied one small kindness at a time until I could not buy thread without permission. I had said the words at the bare table and hated that I meant them, but I was done being counted. Whatever the room held, I meant to be the woman who read it first, and I meant to read it for Salome, and for Anelise, and for the girl not yet married whose name I did not yet know was already waiting for a page. She died on a Saturday night. I have thought often about the day of it, how the woman who kept Sunday reckoning her whole life let go of it on the one night the door would have been locked and the key on her apron by morning. It was Anelise and I in the room when it happened, in the low hours after midnight. The men had gone to rest. The dying is long, and the living must sleep. Her breathing changed and thinned and then simply was not there anymore, and the room was very still, and the cord lay against her throat, where it had lain for weeks. Anelise looked at me across the bed and did not say a word. She did not have to. I lifted the cord from her neck with hands that did not shake, which surprised me. I had expected to shake, but there is a calm that comes when a thing you have circled for 2 years is finally in front of you, and the calm is almost worse than fear, because it means you have already decided. The key was warm from her body, the same warmth that had always been in the door, and I closed my hand around it. Anelise pulled the sheet up over the still face and said she would wake the men at first light, not before, and that first light was 2 hours off, and that a person could do a great deal in 2 hours if she had decided what she was for. We told no one that night. We sat the last watch as if nothing had changed, and near 4 o'clock, when the house was deepest asleep, I went up the narrow hall to the door that had never opened for me. Anelise stood at the foot of the stairs with a candle, keeping watch, her whole family's safety in the risk of it, and I have never in my life been given a gift as large as that woman standing in the dark for me. The key turned easily. The wood was warm under my hand from the banked chimney behind it. I want you to remember the boy's coat, the 4 eggs, the bare table, and the closed book, because the door that held the answer to all of it swung open without a sound. Before I could cross the threshold, I heard the stair creak, and my husband was there in his nightshirt, the candle catching the grief and the shock on his face at once. He did not shout. He never did. He said my name, once, the way you say the name of something falling. He asked me, quietly, to close the door and give him the key, and let the room pass to him as it was meant to. He said his mother was not yet cold, that this was not the hour, that there was a right way, and this was not it, and he meant every word, and every word was true, and none of it was the truth that mattered. I told him I only wanted to read my own page. I said it plainly, standing in the doorway of the forbidden room with the key still in the lock. He flinched as though I had struck him, because to him the request was a wound. It meant I did not trust the family, did not trust him, did not believe he would carry the weight gently. He tried the trade one last time, the same trade the elder women had offered at the bare table, only sweeter now because he loved me. He said if I would step back, he would give me a real allowance of my own, coins in my own drawer, and a seat beside him at the reckoning, a place in the keeping, a promotion into the count. And I understood that this was the mercy the house had always offered its restless women, the mercy that had turned every daughter-in-law who noticed into a keeper who managed the next one. Step from the counted side to the counting side, and the pain stops. The elder woman at the table had taken that trade. The mother had taken it, once, when she was young and cold in a warm house. It was the oldest door in that family, older than the pine one, and it stood open in front of me in my husband's grieving face. All I had to do was accept a seat, and I would never be hungry or humbled again. I would only have to spend the rest of my life doing to other women what had been done to me. I said no, not loudly. I said it the way you say a thing you are certain of, and I stepped across the threshold into the room. It was smaller than 2 years of imagining had made it. A plain desk, a lamp, and shelves. Floor to ceiling, dark-bound books like the one from the bare table, decades of them, 100 years of them, each spine marked with a span of years in faded ink. The warmth of the chimney had kept them dry and whole. This was the room, not a room of shame or sin or hidden treasure. A room of women, written down and shelved, the family's true wealth kept safer than any coin. My husband did not follow me in. He stood in the doorway with the candle, and I saw something break in him that had nothing to do with anger, the understanding, perhaps for the first time, of what it was he had been guarding every Sunday of his life. I took the newest book from the shelf, the one whose years included mine, and I set it on the desk and opened it, and Anelise's candle came up the stairs behind him because she had heard the quiet and known it was over. And I began, at last, in the cold light of the day his mother died, to read the count that had been kept on me since the morning I was married, as the settlement of a debt I never knew I owed. I found my page near the back, in a hand I did not know, dated the week of my wedding. It listed what I had brought in, my few dresses valued to the coin, my grandmother's Bible, the one quilt, and beside it, in a column headed against, the old land debt between my husband's people and my father's, the debt I had been sent west to settle. My marriage was entered as a transaction, balanced to the shilling. Below it, in a newer hand, ran the small entries of 2 years, 4 eggs, 1 length of gray wool, a child's coat made without leave, my whole life in that house, priced and posted, credited and owed, kept behind a warm door on the Lord's day. Bound into my page was the paper itself, the one I had signed on my wedding day, believing it a blessing. I read it then, for the first time, though I had put my name to it 2 years before. It was an agreement of submission, written close in the old script, promising my obedience, my labor, and any property I brought or might inherit to the order of the family, to be held and dispersed at the keeper's discretion. I had signed it smiling, 17 and grateful, with my mother pressing my hand. Anelise had signed one. Salome, 2 generations back, had signed one. Every woman shelved in that room had written her own name against her own freedom on the happiest day of her life. And I understood, holding it, the shape of the whole thing at last. The family's fame for honesty was true. They paid every debt, forgave every neighbor, gave first at every fire. But the warmth had been financed, in part, by the small inheritances and unpaid labor and surrendered wills of the women who married in, absorbed into the accounts as safekeeping and reconciled every Sunday before God. The mother had not built it. She had inherited it from the woman who managed Salome and would have passed it to whoever accepted the seat at the reckoning. The count was the true estate. The dairy was only its face. I read further, and I found the thing that decided what I did next. Near the front of the newest book, in the mother's own hand, was a page begun but not filled. It had a name at the top and a span of years left open. A girl of the district, 16, promised in an understanding not yet spoken aloud, intended for Anelise's eldest son when she came of age. The mother had prepared her page before her death, the way you set aside cloth for a coat you mean to sew. The count did not end with a death. It only waited for the next bride to smile and sign, and that girl's page, blank and waiting, is what turned my reading into a decision. I had no camera. We do not keep them. So I did what a woman in that house could do. By the light of Anelise's candle, in what remained of the dark, I copied my own page, Anelise's, the girl's blank waiting one, and the plainest entries of Salome's, in my own hand onto the loose leaves Anelise had torn free years ago and never had the courage to use. I did not take the books. Taking them would have been theft the family could name and punish and bury. Leaving them and carrying only the truth in my own writing was something else, testimony, in a hand no one could call stolen. When the men found us at first light, the mother was cold, and the room was open, and I was sitting at the desk with the book closed in front of me, and the copied leaves already gone from sight, given to Anelise to keep where no one would look. I did not lie about having read. There was no use, and I was done with the small dishonesties the house ran on. I told my husband and his brother, plainly, what the room held, and that I had read my own page, and that I knew about the girl, and I told them that I meant the district's ministers to know as well, not the whole world, only the men whose task it was to weigh such things before God, since the family had made God their bookkeeper. I will not tell you it ended in triumph, because it did not, and I promised you the truth over the ending you might want. The ministers heard me. Some were troubled, one was not, and said a family's ordering of its own was not the church's business. The practice was not destroyed. It was exposed enough that it could not go on unseen, which is a smaller and realer thing than justice. My husband was shamed within the family, not before the district. The count had protected too many reputations for anyone to want it fully aired. The absorbed inheritances were not returned. Anelise never got her mother's money back. Salome, whoever she had been, got nothing but a stranger's granddaughter reading her name in the cold. But the girl of 16 never signed a page. That was the one clean thing I carried out of that room. Her understanding was quietly ended, and she married elsewhere, and I like to think she never learned how near she came to being shelved. The Sunday door does not lock anymore. There is no one left who wants the count kept, and the books sit on their shelves gathering the damp the chimney used to spare them. I kept the brass key. I never lock the door with it. I keep it in the drawer that finally holds my own coins, as the plainest reminder I own, that a room which could only ever be locked from the inside had, all along, opened with a single turn. I still live in that house. I want to say that plainly, because you may have expected me to describe a night flight in a borrowed buggy, and there was none. Leaving was never the freedom I was after. I stayed, but I stay now on terms I read before I agreed to them, which is the only kind of staying that is not a slow surrender. My name is on the deed of a small parcel that is mine. The egg money is mine, and I know to the coin what a length of wool costs, and I buy it without asking anyone's leave. These are small things. In that house they were the largest things there were, and I fought 2 years, and a woman's dying to hold them in my own hands. What I reclaimed was not comfort. My marriage is honest now, but honesty and warmth are not the same, and I will not pretend the second came back with the first. My husband and I are careful with each other, like people who have seen each other's worst weather and stayed under the same roof anyway. He guards no door now. He has never fully forgiven me for the shame, and I have never fully forgiven him for the years he called his keeping a gift. But we raise our children in a house where the accounts can be read by anyone who can read, and that is more than either of us was given, and it will have to be enough. Some things were not made right, and I will not tidy them for you. Anelise's inheritance is still a number in a book, credited to a family that will never pay it back. Salome remains only a name in a fever and a line in an old ledger, a woman who noticed too soon and was managed too well, and I will never know what noticing cost her. There was no grand correction, no elder rising to declare the old order broken. There was only one girl who did not sign, and a door that no longer locks, an account that finally stopped growing because the woman meant to inherit it laid down the pen instead. I think often of that first year, of standing in the upstairs hall on a Sunday, laying my hand flat on the warm pine and feeling the chimney's heat come through it, believing the warmth was something holy. It was only paper being kept dry. That is the truest picture I can give you of the whole thing, a woman mistaking the machinery of her own keeping for tenderness, because tenderness was the shape it was handed to her in. The warmth was real. The heat in that door was real. It simply came from the fire that kept the count legible, and not from anything that loved me. If there is a meaning in it, it is smaller and harder than the meanings people like to end on. It is only this: obedience that is written down is still obedience taken, and a rule you were never allowed to read was never a rule made for your good. The most controlling thing in that house never raised its voice. It wore an apron and saved me the first apple butter and called its keeping love. Control does not always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it arrives as the kindest hands in the house, doing your counting for you, so gently that you thank them for it, right up until the day you ask to see the book. I have used the word I all through this, because it was my page I finally read. But some of you have been doing your own quiet arithmetic while you listened. Your house may look nothing like mine. No buggy, no bishop, no door at the end of a farmhouse hall. The custom may be strange to you, and the dress is stranger. But the feeling of being kept from something that is plainly your own, and being made to feel that wanting to see it is a fault in you, that feeling does not need a farmhouse to live in. It can live in any house where one person keeps the count and calls it care. So here is the only thing I will ask of you, and it is not a wound to reopen. I want you to think of one ordinary arrangement in your own life that everyone treats as settled and no one has ever quite explained. A habit, a paper, a task that is simply how things are done. And I want you to tell me, in the comments, what your locked door was and who held the key. Not the pain of it, just the shape of it. Because I have learned that these doors survive on our agreement not to name them, and naming is where the lock first loosens. If these stories matter to you, stay with me, and I will keep telling them plainly, without spectacle, the way they deserve. I do not lock the upstairs door anymore. On Sundays now, when the house is quiet and the record my husband used to play sits silent in its cabinet, I go up the narrow hall and I leave that door standing open, just a hand's width, so the light from the window falls across the shelves and the old books gather their honest dust. It is a small thing to do, but I do it every Sunday, on purpose, in the place where a woman once settled the week's accounts before God in secret. The count is closed, the door is open, and the only key that ever mattered sits in a drawer beside coins that are, at last, my own.